Yes, sir, Captain Long John, Long John Sinclair there, for anyone who's not familiar with that, or rather, the colorful personality here that we have overseeing the operations on the Robin Hood, flagship to the Internet's one and only cooperative podcast network. Broadcasting from under heavily sprayed South Korean skies, I am your host and ship's Chief Communications Officer, Jaffe Ryder. Today on Pirate Radio Podcast, we have episode 15 with author and renowned occult researcher, Mr. William Ramsey, author of, among other things, his currently upcoming title. I believe it may have, in fact, just been released this past week, if I'm not mistaken, or even today, perhaps. We'll have to ask him about that when he manages to contact us here just briefly. But the new book is called Children of the Beast, Aleister Crowley's Shadow over Humanity. William, are you standing by? Are you there?
I'm here. Thank you for having me on your show.
That's great. Yeah, I think we've got everything together here and working in proper order and fashion, so we can continue with and carry on with where we were at when we were just basically left off. Now, as I was explaining earlier, protocol here with coming on board the Robin Hood, we start with asking people if they can provide any antidote or story or some kind of pirate tie-in, maybe even just a little something that can help present their pirate credentials. So I think you had a story regarding Prince, actually, the recently sadly great loss to the world of music and probably humanity as a whole, really. But you had something to say about that?
I did. When I was younger, this is my pirate tie-in, I was at a film. I was probably about 17. I was at a movie theater watching Aliens, the kind of reboot of the Alien movie. And when I got out, I was told by the kind of porter or guy who was working there that the artist Prince had rented out an entire theater to watch a movie. And so everybody there who I was with, we were all younger, we wanted to see Prince when he was walking out. So we waited and we sat in front of the door to a movie called The Pirate. It was a Roman Polanski movie that was wretched. So poor Prince sat there and watched The Pirate. When he came out, we all wanted to get his autograph. So one guy stuck the pen in front of his face. Well, his bodyguard was like 250 pounds with his arm was like a tree stump, and he just stuck it out. And us kind of little kids got pushed back as we watched him walk out of the theater with this woman into his black limo and zipped out of there. So it was, I was just thinking about that story, when he died. That was kind of my Prince story.
That's some pretty heavy synchronicity.
Yeah, it's pretty wild.
Yeah. Whoa.
And it's it was a Roman Polanski film, one of his lesser known films. It's called Pirates.
Yeah, okay. Well, we'll definitely be adding all this to the show notes.
His name was, and it was starring Walter Matthau.
Walter Matthau, yes. I mean, of course, anyone that's followed the synchronicity.
It's pretty wild.
For any, he's passed away now, of course, but a very well-known actor. So, basically, though, for listeners who haven't really heard of you or your work before. And let me just get this straight. As far as your book goes, is that have you just recently published that in an independent?
I'm literally just on the end. I probably will have it done within the week. So I'm thinking, it'll probably. I just have to reread the last part of it. So I'm very, very close, super close. I've actually been working on it and rewriting it. It's 450 pages, 730 footnotes. So it's a very thorough an attempt at a thorough analysis of Aleister Crowley's effect upon history, the 20th century and beyond. So I think people will find it very interesting. There's a lot of people known and unknown who Aleister Crowley has influenced.
Absolutely. I mean, he was one of the top major figures of the 20th century. And as you say, with a serious influence and impact on a lot of people's perspectives and so forth, philosophy.
Absolutely. I mean, the artists and musicians, they all a lot of them really look to Crowley as kind of their, ideologue in a lot of ways.
Mm-hmm. So for people that don't really know much about you, they haven't heard about you or your work, why don't you just kind of back things up a little bit and give us a bit of an overview, starting wherever you like, as far as, even into your personal history, as far back as you want to go with that. And how this all kind of brought you around to, and why drawn to, and finding such a keen interest in the life of the great beast.
Yeah, that's an excellent question. I think I'm surprised looking back myself that I came to be a Crowley researcher, but I grew up in Northern California. I went to UC Berkeley. I have a history degree. I also have a JD and I'm a member of the State Bar of California. And I was always a researcher and reader. I think at some point in my 20s, I realized that a lot of the history that I had learned and taught was bogus. There was a lot of things left out. I was very naive. I really believed what was written and things like that. And I really kind of went on a quest to kind of get the real hidden history that was really important. Like, I used to believe that that Oswald shot JFK, and now I can't even believe I believe that. Anyway, so I was a reader of all kinds of alternate history and really sought out to, find as much information as I could. Whether it was good or bad, I would still read it. So I read a lot about, what happened in Oklahoma, the Oklahoma City bombing in Murrah. I read a lot about Waco, and I lived in D.C. for 3 years, so I saw a lot of stuff up front. I actually was kind of, in a very tertiary sense, involved in this kind of Vince Foster case, who was one of the Clintons' friends who ended up dead at Fort Marcy Park. And that really changed my life. And then I moved back to California, and I was a 9/11 researcher. I really looked into 9/11 very thoroughly, probably 3 years after the event. At first, I didn't think, I didn't know that it was deceptive. But, as I read more and more, and I read other writers, I realized this whole thing is it's a fraud, or at least what they were saying. And while I was reading the 9/11 bits, I kept noticing the number 11 kept showing up. And I read something by a guy by the name of Colonel May. He was a military guy who kept seeing the 11s as well. I don't think he understood the full impact or import of those 11s, but he saw a pattern as well. So that kind of led me off, and I looking through these numbers, was led back to Aleister Crowley, this character who was born in 1875. He died in 1947. He was a British citizen who was from a upper class family, a very wealthy family. And the reason why is because in the events of 9/11, the plane's numbers were 11, 77, 93, 175, and I think at first glance they don't have meaning. But in Crowley's system, those are like the prime numbers, really, 11, 75, and 93. And to have those all together in one event at 9/11 as well, which are huge power numbers. 11 is really the number of magic. It's the number of the New Age in Crowley's system. And 9 is really the top number. I didn't really understand the numerology, but the 9 is the most powerful number of the initial first 10 numbers because it's the top number before the numbers repeat themselves. And so 9/11 really was an important numerological date. Anyway, so I started reading Crowley. I read all his biographies. I read everything. I tried to understand who he was as a historical figure. I really wasn't interested in the magical angle. I didn't really kind of get it as an occultist. I really was reading it as a Christian and trying to get a good understanding of what it said. And there was a lot of omissions and outright and disinformation about Crowley, in my opinion. And that led me to write my first book, Prophet of Evil, 9/11, Aleister Crowley, and the New World Order, because even the title kind of explains the book. Most people would think those were individual kind of concepts separated from each other, but what I tried, my thesis was to show that the New World Order, 9/11, and Aleister Crowley had a lot in common. And so that was my first book, and I really, this book that I'm coming out with was, I was trying to trace Crowley's history, and trying to look at the real history, look at all of these figures, who was influenced by him, and while I was doing that, I kind of came across this video of the West Memphis Three, and that video of the West Memphis Three involved Crowley magic in theory and practice, which I had read. And I was like, oh, I didn't know that was involved in the case. Now, about the West Memphis Three, I had watched the first video documentary that was done by Joe Berlinger and Sinofsky in probably 1996, and I hadn't thought much of it. I heard they'd been released, but I didn't know Crowley was involved. They were released in August of 2011, and I went back and started reading. Well, there were two sides of an opinion of whether they were culpable or not, whether they were involved or not. So that kind of really kind of piqued my interest. Well, which one is right? And so I was reading about the whole case. What the lucky thing is that all of the case files of the West Memphis 3 are at a website called Callahan's. So it was really easy for me to just start reading the court case from the beginning to the end, and everything that the police had garnered, all of their interviews, all the police statements, that were made under perjury. You can't lie. So, really fascinating. And when I read that, I realized, whoa, Crowley's heavily involved in this. There's tons of Satanism. It's incredible that these celebrities were involved. People like Johnny Depp, Margaret Cho, Henry Rollins, Eddie Vedder. They raised something like $20 million, got the best attorneys. So it was really something else because these incredibly talented attorneys and PR people were involved in the case. One guy's name is Dennis Reardon, who was Barry Bond's attorney and got him off on a misdemeanor. So these guys, an appellate attorney, by the way. So my book basically shows that, what I tried to prove with all factual statements and 500 footnotes is that these were the right people who were put in jail, which was really antagonistic to the general public opinion, which is that they were railroaded and they were put in jail because they were black. But I think my book takes that apart and realizes a lot of people didn't realize that they were PR'd, public relations, to really believe that. And if you have tons of money, you can pay for excellent lawyers and good PR. And one thing people should ask themselves is, why does somebody who's innocent need a PR person? But so that was really Abomination, and I've just kind of been researching Crowley and the occult. I have a YouTube site that has 150 or so videos called Occult Investigations. I have a website, occultinvestigations.com. So people can go there and kind of see my books and what I'm up to. But that's really the long story of how I came to be a person who was interested in the occult. I really think that it's probably one of the most important doctrines to understand in this new millennium, because I think that in our culture and in politics, these ideas that Crowley had are really the operative ideas that are affecting political and cultural life.
I'd like to come back to the West Memphis 3 a little later in the show, and we will, of course, be presenting all of your links within the context of the show notes that we provide. We like to put together extensive show notes for our listeners. So, but just before we do that, what I was hoping that maybe we could, one thing to keep in mind is of course, and to take note of, as you say, September 11th, and I'm not sure if really you want to spend too much time on that today. I was hoping to maybe kind of get into kind of take things in a different, explore some other avenues.
Great.
But as far as isn't it interesting to note, just briefly, isn't it interesting to note yet again, just another coincidence, of course, 9/11. Who happened to be the commander in chief at that particular time?
George W. Bush.
Yeah, the one thing there's a couple of things that him and Crowley actually hold in common. One is apparently, one was their cruelty towards animals as children.
That's an excellent point.
Brutal. And secondly is that they seem to, perhaps some people speculate, share a common bloodline, and a rather intimate. Not too many degrees of separation. If you, as with the Hitler theory of Hitler, and whether he was like a bastard Rothschild or something along those lines, more or less. Which a lot of scholars, they like to kind of poo-poo, I guess, for lack of a better word. But Bush, Barbara Bush, what's the tie-in there with Crowley? Because apparently there's a lot of people that know about that. It's widely discussed within parapolitical circles, but...
I think that, the interesting thing about that story is it's not something that can go away. There's a lot of speculation. It's hard to prove, but her mother was in France at the time that Crowley was in France. Crowley fled his abbey of Thelema in 1923. He was actually kicked out of Italy. He was on the island of Sicily.
Yeah, Mussolini chased him out, didn't he?
Yes, correct. That's absolutely correct. And so he actually fled to northern Africa and then came back to France. Crowley was constantly moving. He's kind of a hard person to keep your finger on, but he ended up in France with a friend who was also a writer by the name of Harris. And he had a wife, O'Hara, and her friend well, she was supposedly friends with Barbara Bush's mother. And during that time, Crowley was he was involved in a magical practice he called the acronym is ECL, Erato Comatose Lucidity. And it required a lot of servitors or people who helped him. And basically, I mean, it involved sexual magic. I'll just leave it at that. So, when the mother came back from France, she was pregnant and she had a baby Barbara. And Barbara married at a fairly early date. I think she was 16 and George Bush Sr. was 18. They got married. They had kind of an arranged marriage. And if you look at the pictures of the mother with her family, her father he was a magazine publisher, editor, but I have a picture of her that she does not look like the other kids. And she actually looks a lot like Crowley, like Crowley did. Crowley's kind of physical characteristics, he had a fairly sizable head compared to the rest of his body. And in a lot of his pictures, you'll see him with a scarf or something to try to kind of disguise it or make it less prominent. And her facial features are just like Crowley's, honest to God. I mean, there's really not much difference. And, everything kind of fits together. The families, I've read things about her and the way she talks about people is just like Crowley. Crowley really was an elitist. He was an unashamed elitist, actually. He only would teach his doctrines to other people who were in the elite. So he only when he was in England, he only went to Oxford and Cambridge to find disciples. And and he actually said, I don't remember verbatim, but have nothing to do with the muck of the mire. Mm-hmm. Have nothing to do with the muck of the mire. Get the diamonds and polish them. And so that was kind of his approach. So, you see that elitism in Crowley, and the Bushes are, if there's an elite in the United States, they're part of it. Yale, privileged, highest secret societies of all different types. So the correlation is really there.
Skull and Bones, just kind of almost like a pirate ship, in fact.
Absolutely, same standard.
Interesting. But here's the thing too. I actually was researching recently. Apparently, one of the things they like to do, they do like to fancy themselves pirates in some ways. So, but we actually
here's another thing. I don't know if you've heard this, Kathy, but supposedly the Bush family traces themselves back to a pirate class of the 16th century, through them to the Knights Templar. So, yes, they trace themselves through a kind of a interesting pirate patronage, and some of their ideas are definitely piracy. The founders of the Russell Trust, which the Skull and Bones comes out of, are drug dealers out of running ships out of China.
And of course, they wouldn't be cashing in at the present moment under Prohibition, would they?
No, and of course not out of Afghanistan, right? So,
sorry, what coming in?
Well, the Afghanistan war took place, and then lithium production skyrockets, right?
Yeah, nothing to do with that either, of course.
It's just coincidence.
Bush, George W. Bush's Skull and Bones name, apparently.
Magog?
No, that would be his father.
And what's the son?
Temporary.
Interesting.
Temporary, and his father with Magog, even more interesting. So and pretty heavy stuff there. So, but yeah, I mean, not all pirates, of course, roam in solidarity. It really depends, doesn't it? So,
it's true. Absolutely.
They can, as far as we're concerned here, I know Captain Long John does not look upon them and their networks and their ways too kindly. No, in fact, it's quite the opposite. So, but anyways, before we get too carried away though and sidetracked, and I think that's enough of that whole, the 9/11 and Bush tie-in that so many people talk about these days. But Charles Henry Allen Bennett, I brought the name up with you just briefly in the quick little pre-interview that we did. A lot of people don't know about him. Myself, I do, because I research these things, as these are interesting topics to explore and examine. So, but what can you tell us about him, and how does he tie into the story of Aleister Crowley?
Well, it's a really interesting point. Bennett was one of Crowley's early friends. When Crowley kind of got done with college, he was seeking the kind of hidden or secret knowledge, and it led him to an early magical organization called the Golden Dawn,
Right.
which was a kind of Rosicrucian post-Masonic group. And a member of that group was a guy by the name of Alan Bennett.
Mm-hmm.
He was actually there before Crowley, and he was seen as having like some serious magical talent, at least by Crowley. Crowley really admired Bennett. They actually lived together.
Mm-hmm.
And the Crowley always had a kind of darker sensibility, and Bennett actually accused Crowley of meddling with the Goetia, which is the old kind of Solomonic magic of the 72 demons. And, he actually, his direct quote is that, "Little brother, you've been meddling with the Goetia, and if you don't stop, the Goetia has been meddling with you." So they lived together. They lived together in London, and Bennett was kind of his tutor, his early tutor on the Kabbalah, magical practices, talisman. That was all through Bennett. To my knowledge, Bennett didn't stay permanently involved with the Golden Dawn. He left England and ended up in India, in Ceylon, which is now Sri Lanka, as a Buddhist monk. And he and him living together, they actually had a lot of magical experiences that I retell in my first book, Prophet of Evil. And it's interesting that you have an interest in Bennett.
Well, one of the Crowley referred to him, I believe, as one of the whitest knights that ever had been. That's what stands out in my mind. So, but yeah, he was not. I don't think he was of the dark side really, or the left-hand path, as some may refer to it. So, in fact, as my take, or basically what I've read is that that in later years, even though, ironically enough, Crowley he gave Bennett his help to pay his. He was a sickly person, I guess, and struggled with a lot of health issues. Correct. And that Crowley actually helped to fund his trip to Asia to research and to investigate, explore the Eastern philosophy and Buddhism, yoga, and so forth. There's an interesting story that you can find if you dig into things deep enough, I guess. That it might even be in Crowley's books. In fact, like the Confessions, or the lie was the True Lies, or the lies of a
Book of Lies.
Book of Lies. Yeah, that he talks about. There's two different. Well, one episode, one story. Have you heard about this, where they were walking down the street together and they passed by some? I'm not sure if it's theosophists or just some people that were making fun of magic wands. This is, and apparently what Bennett did, because he had his educational background on a unit from university higher learning standpoint was in like electrical engineering, I believe, or something like that. But what he did, he apparently had designed this wand with a steel. With steel or copper or something along those lines, and he had this all rigged up. And when these people they were mocking the wands and people, that sort of thing, he actually took it out and zapped them, and zapped one of them. They fell to the ground like largely like a semi-catatonic state for the next like 10 to 12 hours or something along those lines. You know about that story?
That's correct. Yeah, Crowley actually retells that story in his Confessions. So
was he telling?
I actually retell that story in my book.
Was he telling? Was he being honest, or was he pulling people's legs though? That's the thing.
I think that Crowley was being honest about that whole story about with the wand.
Another one. Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say that here's the direct quote from my book. One day, a party of theosophists were chatting skeptically about the power of the blasting rod. Alan promptly produced his wand and blasted one of them. Yeah. It took 14 hours to restore the incredulous individual to the use of his mind and his muscles.
There you go. So another story, maybe you have this in your book as well, when there was a time as a Ceylon, and I think Bennett might have spent some time in another Asian country or two with his spiritual path and pursuits. But the one time where Crowley, I guess, came to Bennett's hut, I guess, where he was meditating, and knocking on the door, no answer, and he's waiting. Eventually he just decided to go in, and he claimed to have opened the door and there seen Alan, Mr. Bennett, levitating.
Interesting.
If you can believe that. I mean,
I never came across that, but I did. What Bennett had was serious asthma. He had lung problems. Mm-hmm. But he did say that Bennett taught Crowley all of these different consciousness levels of Buddhism. And here is what, he says, like he made the first major trance of dhyana, which was an intense sound, light, and he described it as an absolute knockout blow to the mind. So Crowley was, he was in Ceylon in 1901 with Bennett.
Mm-hmm. So the long-standing relationship there, and what ultimately, unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, I guess this is the way things go. Bennett had in later years, Crowley tried to approach him and to, kind of get back up to speed on things and reestablish their friendship, but apparently Bennett he turned him away. He refused to even meet with him. I guess presumably because of that. By that point in time, Crowley's reputation had really outdone itself.
And I mean, it was a deserved, bad reputation. Crowley really blackened himself by doing all kinds of drugs and sex magic that I think Bennett rejected. I think Crowley still, when he wrote his Confessions, his autobiography, which was published first in the 1920s, he still dedicated part of that biography to Alan Bennett. So he really respected Bennett, and it seems like Bennett did not respect him. So he actually wrote about Bennett. He did what he could. So, it sounds like Bennett tried to keep him on the more straight and narrow, but Crowley wouldn't have it.
Mm-hmm. So let's see where we want to go with things at this particular time. We got so many different points that we could hit on as far as kind of unpacking. How about World War II? That would be a good place to kind of to take a look at, because as you say, Secret Agent 666. I believe there's another book out on the market.
Yes, it's called by Jerry Spence. It's a good book.
Richard Spence.
Thank you.
Yeah. So basically, but World War II, apparently, the great beast really seemed to, as you say, get around. And,
there's no doubt. I mean, he was in Weimar, Germany right before Hitler came to power. He was there with, a bunch of other spies, a guy by the name of Hamilton. He was there with the guy who was the inspiration for the film and Cabaret. His name was Christopher Isherwood, who was kind of a famous writer and diarist who wrote about Crowley. He said the only thing he really believed in was heroin and cocaine. That's what he remembered about Crowley. So there's an influence there, but Crowley, some of his disciples, one of his early disciples, was a real influence upon Hitler and Hitler's generals. His name was J.F.C. Fuller. He's kind of lost to history, but he was a kind of a famous military guy who became one of Crowley's first disciples, but went on to formulate the idea of mechanized warfare that the English never really kind of followed on, but the Germans picked it up. And as a matter of fact, one of Hitler's early main generals, a guy by the name of Guderian, went to England and sat down with J.F.C. Fuller. So he's sitting with this guy who is Crowley's disciple and was a follower of Crowley, and learned this tank battle. So you can kind of make a direct tie to Hitler's Nazi Germany's armored military warfare, and the success of it, the domination of Europe, can be traced to a disciple of Aleister Crowley. And when Hitler turned 50, one of the two Englishmen he invited to his birthday party was J.F.C. Fuller. And it's very interesting too, because some of Hitler's ideas and some of his statements are direct quotes from Crowley's Book of the Law. One of the most important book that Crowley had was a book he claims to have received in Egypt in 1904. And it's broken up into 3 parts. He wrote it over 3 days. And it really became the centerpiece of his religion. And it was brought into the OTO, which he became head of in 1925, which is a German secret society. That's its original designation. And Hitler had some of those ideas. He actually repeated some things. The only measure of victory is success, or right and wrong is successful. And these are quotes right out of the Book of the Law. They're very similar. And anyway, so JFC Fuller was invited by Hitler to this parade of his 50th birthday, and he basically tells JFC Fuller, "How do you like your children?" So referring to his armored military parade. And JFC Fuller records it. So the Crowley still is wrapped up in World War II as well. He is in England during the time of World War II when it started, 1939. He was a supporter of England, and he was alleged. Hasn't been confirmed yet, but people have stated that his handler was Ian Fleming, the writer of the James Bond novels in World War II. A lot of Ian Fleming's kind of ideas are covered by the Official Secrecies Act, as well as Crowley's kind of intelligence history is all kind of still covered up. But it's been admitted in England that he was a member of the early secret services before MI5 and MI6. But just getting back to Crowley in World War II, Fleming was the most important part of the armed forces in England was their Navy. And the head of the Navy at that time was Godfrey, World War II. And his direct underling was Ian Fleming. And Ian Fleming, he was praised by his boss as somebody very imaginative, very involved in creating operations. And Fleming had studied in German. He was fluent in German and English. And a lot of these, he formulated all of these great plots. And one of his plots was to try to lure a head figure of Hitler's Nazi party to England in an attempt to, what the ploy was is that they said that there were certain parts of English aristocracy who were far right-wing who wanted to have peace with Germany. And that rumor was actually planted by one of Ian Fleming's assets in Germany. And what it did is create this really strange element that Rudolf Hess, who was the third member of the Nazi Party,
right.
who had edited Hitler's Mein Kampf, gets in a plane and flies to northern England to try to negotiate a peace. And when he lands, he's speaking all these weird statements and stuff like that. And there's a letter that was sent to Ian Fleming, and it's in the records by Aleister Crowley, who said, "I will, talk to Hess. I can try to figure out," because Hess was a known occultist. Yeah. He was a deep, and so was Hitler. But hang
on. But also, I think as the story goes, Hitler really tried to distance himself from Hess after this whole debacle with him flying to England, because it might have been not even on Hitler's orders that he had done this. Apparently, a lot of people speculated it was to negotiate a peace. Maybe Hess was in some kind of manic state, or maybe he genuinely felt that he was doing the right thing. Or what's your take on that exactly?
I think that it was very convenient for Hitler to distance himself from the failed plot. Right. Of course, I think that would be his natural reaction. I think, personally, that he probably knew something was going on. Hess had to have a very specialized plane that was able to make that long flight. So he would have had to have done it under the utmost secrecy of other Nazi officials and Hitler. And it's hard to believe that requisition would be done without Hitler's or somebody else's knowledge or that information getting back to him. So it was very convenient for him to distance himself. I know that Hitler, in the history, said that he never wanted to really battle against England. He was always trying to make peace. But they declared war against him after Hitler invaded Poland. And he signed the kind of non-confront, who was the guy who went and signed the piece of paper with Hitler? So,
Neville Chamberlain.
That's right. So, poor Neville.
Are you familiar at all with Anthony Sutton and his writings? Because one of the things that he's kind of mapped out and laid out for his readers is how, it's the same old thing. It's like it's the highest level of conspiracy one can possibly imagine, where you have these elite 1% interests. And they're transnational. They always have been. Now it's no different than what it's always been, really. Conspiring, they're doing business, right?
Absolutely. So, they did the same thing with Russia. They did the same thing with Nazi Germany. you're right. They're absolutely transnational, and all those financial interests, if they think they can make a buck, they will deal with the worst type of dictator or something.
Yeah.
So I believe Sutton's research is correct.
I
think the funny thing about Russia is that all during the time communism was operant, they were selling off the products of communism to the free market.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just like it's basically animal farm.
Well, it's like not bombing the bombing raids on Germany, Dresden, and so forth. They just conveniently missed the Ford factories and the aspirin. Who's the company? Bayer. I think those. Well, we won't. All of our IT&T. Like just okay. We'll just careful now. It's like make sure you don't. Be careful.
Yeah. The reality is that
kill a bunch of people. We can kill a bunch of people, but don't hit those buildings. We can. The citizens are fine. We can clean out. We can. No sacrifices to. Is just
right.
Go ahead. We have bombs.
I think the interesting thing is that here's Crowley, who is involved in this kind of interplay of really kind of highest level players on the political scene in World War II, and Ian Fleming used Crowley as a reference for his first villain Le Chiffre or the Cipher in Casino Royale. So
didn't know that.
Crowley is his first use. It's one of the many use. Crowley has actually been referenced in quite a few films as kind of a bad guy. So that's just one of them.
Talk about a small world. It's a bit of an aside, but I actually there's a guy, one of the people that is believed Fleming based his James Bond character on. My father, back when I was he living in the area, the guy's name was Patrick Dieseljob, who I'm sure any researchers have you heard of Patrick?
I've never heard that name.
Well, neither did I until my dad drew it to my attention. It's like, yeah, you should go interview this guy, and for me it just is like I found the story captivating and very intriguing, of course, but I just felt like he was an old man at that point, and I didn't really want to intrude on his space. I wanted to just respect him and his life, and whatever he'd done. But apparently he was a maverick. Apparently, okay, so that was one of the things he was known for. Was kind of like to flipping the bird to his military superiors and just doing what he knew was best, and he was right. He was right. So you know how that goes with the old thing with like rules of engagement and so forth, and how often like the deck, things are just totally cooked, and like you look at the Korean War and all kinds of Vietnam. It's like, well, why can't we bomb them? It's like, why can't we take them out? Well, we've got a rules of engagement here, and So it makes me scratch my head. It's like, well, what's really going on here? Seriously. So, but that is an aside. I guess the point I'm trying to make. It's a small world,
absolutely. I think you'll find that Crowley and all these guys have a lot of attachments to each other.
Yeah. Okay, so the Green Dragon Society. I think I first read about that in was it Trevor Ravenscroft's The Spear of Destiny, where I first came. I think I heard you with one of the shows you did with Visigoth, and that is, by the way, for our listeners, where I first heard William was as I recall speaking to Visigoth on his show. So people can check that out, do like a web search, and maybe be able to access some of the old archives. So, but yeah, the Green Dragon Society, the Tibetan monks. Do you know about that? That Hitler had disposed of, and the whole story.
There was something where the story where he had a bunch of monks in Germany, and at the end of the war they were all killed. Is that correct?
Right.
Yeah, I've heard that. Yes, I'm familiar. At the end of the war, he had something he called the Nero option, or the Nero program, where they just blew everything up and killed everybody. And Hitler was a monster to his own people. At the end of the war, during the bombing raids, like 250,000 or 500,000 Germans found shelter in the sewers of Berlin, and Hitler had those washed out. So he basically killed off all those people who he supposedly, was their hero. So the Nero option, and that was part of it, the death of those option. And there were other people who were, they were just mass shootings and mass killings. And at the end of the war, that's what kind of sped up the concentration camp murders and everything.
Well, let's bring things, unless you've got something more that you'd like to offer. That I was thinking we can maybe kind of just bring things more up to speed and start to tie into some of these characters like Timothy Leary, Charles Manson, the whole the Scientology connection. I mean, but let's start with William Burroughs and and so forth. Let's start with Timothy Leary. How does he fit into your latest publication exactly?
Well, I mean, Leary was kind of a button-down social scientist, a psychologist, and at some point he was in Harvard and became kind of a recruit. I think he was an early recruit of the CIA of all of these programs where they were drugging people. He was using magic mushrooms and LSD. He actually had very early, right before Aldous Huxley died, he had a meeting with Huxley where they described and talked about, and this is in Leary's book Flashbacks, where they discussed whether LSD should be kept, to an elite group of experimenters or spread out over the populace. And Aldous, said keep it quiet, and Leary became the Johnny Appleseed of acid. And he became a real admirer of Crowley. There's a famous video of him stating, "I'm carrying on the work of Aleister Crowley." And he didn't just say that, he actually acted on it. He did a lot of things that were very similar to Crowley. He threw the I Ching like Crowley, which is kind of like a divination sticks.
That's right.
He carried a tarot deck. He actually named one of his books, he basically named his book, it was a mix of Crowley's two books. And so he really referenced Crowley. He did a lot of rituals and kind of ritual magic. He became an illuminate of what's called illuminate of Thanateros, which is kind of like a black magician offshoot of the OTO. But the name of the book that he did was Confessions of a Hope Fiend, which is an amalgam of Crowley's Confessions and his book about drugs called A Diary of a Drug Fiend. So Leary really, and there's just tons of stuff in my book about how close he was. He actually traveled to a place that Crowley traveled to in Algeria. It was a oasis called Bou Sada, where Crowley did Enochian magical calls with this poor, hapless poet that he knew by the name of Victor Newberg. And they did sexual magic and just kept doing these calls, and they summoned this, according to Crowley, this demon of the abyss called Choronzon. And actually, Leary was there doing something similar with a guy by the name of Brian Barrett. He was a drug dealer, an English drug dealer, and he writes about it in his book called The Road of Tears or something like that. Anyway, so it was...
Crowley's book, Tears Without Magic? Or Magic Without Tears, yeah.
Magic Without Tears is the name of Crowley's book, and the name of Brian Barrett's is called The Road of Excess.
Okay.
And that's actually borrowed from a Blake poem.
That's right.
So
the road to excess. In fact, I was just thinking about this before we went to air. The road to excess leads to the gates of wisdom. Is that how?
Right. Yeah. Something. Let me see if I can find the direct quote.
And from what I understand, that really is how their magical system works. It's like drink everything, screw everything, smoke everything. Just the most extreme. And you'll, I guess, get it eventually. Whatever you're looking for, this enlightenment or something. So. I guess it's taking a longer way around, I suppose.
Yeah, the direct quote is from William Blake's Proverbs of Hell, from the Marriage of Heaven and Hell, and it is the road of excess leads to the palace of wisdom.
Okay, there we go.
So Leary really was this figure, and it's very interesting too. Is Leary kind of kept a tradition on of a lot of Crowley. Crowley himself was a guy who received a lot of information from entities and supernatural events, and Leary himself had something called the Starseed Communications, where he received information from a non-human entity about going to populate the stars.
The Bashar of his times, was he?
Bashar, well, I don't know what that means.
Oh, it's some of our listeners will. He's just these channelers and so forth.
Okay.
Claim to channel.
It was something like that, He basically received the message that it was time to leave Earth, and learn to walk to the stars. Leary was a panspermian. So it's like something from the movie Prometheus, where a rock came to the earth with some type of human life, and that's where we're from. He said a lot of things like, you're your own God. He had a lot of occult ideas. You are a God, act like one. That was kind of one of the, he always said.
Panspermia, but there's more to that. There's another kind of addition to that too, where you have actual extra, alien interaction and kind of at the helm, basically playing a leading role in seeding planets throughout the galaxies. And to me, that's kind of, I guess that makes me a panspermian too, because to me that makes the most sense, And then, Bible, angels in the Bible, and these wheels of fire in the sky, and these beings of light that appear that, strange, so, but.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of Christians out there now that talk about, angels having relations with human beings, So that's actually a fairly common position of a lot of Christians.
Right. But I wouldn't say. I know you yourself. I think you were a Catholic for.
I definitely identify as a Christian and a Bible believing Christian.
Mm-hmm,
so I don't consider myself a Catholic. I don't go to a Catholic church.
Right, but I mean, I'm not sure if you were suggesting I was Christian, but I mean, I don't have a problem really, like with anybody's religion. So as long as they're not, it's like the John Stuart Mill kind of the principle of liberty, where just I know, and this is where I think this is different though. You see with Crowley perhaps and John Stuart Mill, unless if you think you can see things a little differently, feel free to kind of say so. But John Stuart Mill is like kind of the do what thou wilt, basically, but just do no harm, And once you start doing harm, which I think Crowley did perhaps in some of his practices, and like dissecting or torturing cats to death, and I mean, 2 of his wives committed suicide, didn't they? And the other ones were like locked up in mental institutes, and
he harmed almost all of his followers. They were all wrecks. Victor Newberg was a psychological wreck. A lot of these people came out of Crowley that were in really bad shape, and Crowley himself was ended up a heroin junkie.
Mm-hmm.
So I think his ideas of just total freedom without any type of restriction were negative. I don't think they're good. And then, there was a time in Crowley's life where somebody asked him and said, "What if 2 people's wills conflict with each other?"
Right.
And he didn't have an answer. So if you got 2 people saying "do what you will," you're going to have inevitable conflict.
You got to negotiate that in some way, I guess, right? So yeah,
right.
Big time.
I guess.
But listen, last week we had our guest was Todd Brendan Fahey. And so the reason I want to bring him up is because we did we talked about Leary and the whole LSD CIA tie-in and so forth. I think Huxley's name came up a time or two. So, but one thing to remember too is that when Leary was out, kind of as you say. I mean, Al Hubbard, others, other writers and commentators and so forth have referred to him as a Johnny Appleseed, but I mean, I think we can all agree that Leary played a pretty central role as well.
Well, he was a more public face. Right. Al Hubbard met with Leary, so there's probably a lot of conversations between them both that were never said anything, but Hubbard comments on Leary and says, he went off on some, Al Hubbard on some off track or something, but yeah, it's interesting that those two were in contact.
And the thing too that I think is quite interesting too to keep in mind is that acid was still legal at that time. Yep. It wasn't until 1967 something
right.
that the federal government's like, well, we're going to make this okay. It's like okay. But
this is what Al Hubbard said of Leary. He said, "I liked him when we first met, but I warned him a dozen times." And then he said, he seemed like a well-intentioned person, but then he went overboard. So, and that's Hubbard's personal.
Yeah.
And then, the interesting thing is that Leary admitted that the CIA started the LSD movement. He said the LSD movement was started by the CIA. He said it straight up.
MK Ultra. We talked about that
last week. He said it flat out. Yeah. So I wouldn't be here now without the foresight of the CIA scientist. Bam. So he basically says it is no accident. It was all planned and scripted by the Central Intelligence, and I'm all in favor of Central Intelligence.
quickly, just let's another 1 degree of separation there with Leary, Mary Pinchot Meyer and JFK. If we could just spend a minute or two on that, and then I want to actually kind of focus on the whole tie-ins with the Beat generation with William Burroughs in particular, I guess, if we could.
And they're all there. The interesting thing is that a lot of Crowley's followers are a lot like Crowley. They're zealot. Somebody's described them as zealot type characters, or people who just show up in major political events or are friends with these different people. Leary knew all the kind of leading lights of his generation, kind of like Crowley did. He knew a lot of writers and artists, and so, when he was giving away his acid, somebody came to him and asked him who was Mary Pinchot Meyer. Well, who's Mary Pinchot Meyer? She was the husband of the founder of, CIA guy who really started, the Project Mockingbird, the program to manipulate public intelligence. Her husband was Cord Meyer, C-O-R-D Meyer.
Yeah, Mockingbird, infiltration and strategic deployment of personalities, people throughout the mainstream media. And now
I suppose stuff up. You can't make it up. Yeah. So she was there's actually a really good book that came out about Mary Pinchot Meyer, written by somebody who knew her when she was younger. I wish I could remember that. I think it's Mary's Ghost. I wish I could remember the title of it, but it's an excellent book, and there's talks by that guy. Mm-hmm. But Mary Pinchot Meyer came to, and she divorced. She got in a real huff with Cord Meyer and became kind of like a counterculture type of figure. And she wanted to do the acid test, and she went to Leary for the drugs. Well, who was she friends with and lovers with was none other than JFK. She was considered to be one of his lovers. And so there's a very good possibility that John F. Kennedy dosed while he was in the presidency. And,
he was Bill Burns. Are you familiar with the book that Bill Burns put out called Dr. Feelgood?
Oh yeah, that sounds familiar. Yeah, so Dr. Feelgood was part of that group too. He was at Millbrook with Leary. So he was always giving shots to make people feel good, and he was giving them to JFK, right?
Yeah, the good Jewish doctor. I forget his exact name, but RFK did not like him, and it was he didn't mind attacking him on the ethnic level, referring to him as a you son of a bitch, kike. Max. There you go, Mac. Thank you. So but Mary, according to what I've read, and there was times, and this might have been like you say, like through Mary Pinchot's recollections or a friend of hers, that JFK was so high, like she'd go to the White House and they would have sex and get really high,
yeah,
like smoking weed, and JFK, it was like a time or two, or once in particular, a noted session time where they met up for one of their liaisons, that he said, look, I just can't take another hit. Are you kidding me? I won't. If the Russians attack, I'll be like completely incapacitated. So
CIA seemed to know of their relationship. They seem to have known one of the many things that irritated them about JFK. And Mary Pinchot Meyer was tragically shot in the Georgetown canals. I wish I could remember the date, but
it was the year after. It was 1964, about a year after the assassination.
October 12th, 1964. So it was. She seemed to be one of the loose ends that needed to be tied up. So it's really tragic.
And who was it?
The black guy. They found some African American dude who was kind of mentally confused, and he ended up getting. There was a famous attorney in D.C. who took his defense and made sure he was acquitted, but he just was a bystander.
Incredible. Typical kind of with the fall guy, the patsy, as Oswald put it.
Before
they got him out of it. But the Reichstag fire, same deal. There's some kind of disoriented, some inarticulate, someone was challenged.
In the Reichstag fire, then they killed the guy, so he couldn't defend himself over time.
Oswald, he seemed to disappear quite quickly too. It's like
it's all a nice little full circle plan,
But let's quickly, just if you could, her diary went missing apparently, as Marilyn Monroe's diary just kind of coincidentally went missing, after her passing. So who was it who some people had witnessed or claimed that was in her house and scrambling to get his hands on that diary? Do you know?
James Jesus Angleton.
Oh, right, yeah.
Right.
What do you?
And
What do you,
I heard that her body was like beaten up, like she got punched by like a boxer, but it was all covered up.
right.
So she was, yeah. So that whole that whole era is just incredible. You know, there's just murders and assassinations happening all the time.
Another member, another character within your rogues gallery of usual suspects, I suppose. And here's the thing too, like, myself, I'm not really, I'm not going to pass judgment on these people or like, I want to hear out the facts, and I want to hear, just how things are presented. And, but you have this sort of information presented, and it definitely does cast people in a not overly entirely flattering light sometimes.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think, like, if for a perfect example is Leary, some people see him as this great, guru, and he's really helping people out, but some of his ideas ruined a generation.
Yeah.
LSD is very dangerous.
Yeah.
People had their minds fried. People committed suicide.
Yeah.
Not everybody could deal with it. Every person's different, and these drugs are very mind altering. I mean, there was the kind of license, and his personal life was terrible. His first wife committed suicide. He actually brought his second lover to his house in front of his married wife, and she walked out in the car and turned it on and basically asphyxiated herself with carbon monoxide. And his daughter, like, they just wanted to be with him. He was never with his kids. His children, like, didn't like him. His one daughter committed suicide. It's just a mess. So this person who's supposed to be like this great thing, and I have in my book, it's just that Leary was just kind of like Crowley, just a very hardened narcissist.
Pied Pipers. He's beware the cult of personality. That's my kind of rule of thumb with anybody. It doesn't matter who you are. Just fill in the blank. So be very aware, because some people are very cagey, very charismatic, and very seductive with their ways. So
you see, Leary, he always had a new idea. He was really intoxicating people with his intelligence, and just to kind of show his light, like his intelligence show off. Yeah. But the effect of his intelligence, I don't think was worthwhile. I don't think it was really a hero.
Let me just address something here, because I do think it does warrant some discussion, or at least consideration. Psychedelics, yes, dangerous. They can be dangerous, but they can also be, as many medical professionals have now acknowledged, they can be treating alcoholism and so forth. And this is, you get things like magic mushrooms, which is kind of comparing apples and oranges, obviously. But I mean, magic mushrooms for alcoholism, LSD. LSD is a little too heavy, I think. Probably. Go ahead.
I've talked to people who said their ayahuasca experience was the best thing they've ever done.
There you go. Exactly.
Some people have come out of these things like with changed ideas.
Yep.
But I think here's the thing: is that some of what Leary advocated, people were not in a controlled environment, and the drugs themselves weren't controlled. So you had this whole thing of, uncontrolled usage in environments that aren't good.
Set and setting, and that's what Huxley talked about as well too. I think his Doors of Perception in that book, and that Leary picked up on and really tried to emphasize and preach, that make emphasis, that you got to be careful. So anyone that has dabbled in or experimented with psychedelics will know this probably too, that it's important that when you do dose, that you're in a comfortable environment with the surroundings that are perhaps familiar to you, or I think in a lot of ways, though, it depends on how mentally strong and aware, grounded.
It's a roll of the dice. Some people come out great, and some people come out they're in a hospital.
Yeah.
So I don't.
A lot of it's personality type too, as well as the sort of the quality of whatever it is you're taking. But let's move on. William S. Burroughs, if you don't mind, let's hear a little bit about him and your take on his how he ties into.
He just was a highly influential person. Most of the cultural figures of the late 20th century look back to Burroughs as an inspiration. There are pictures with that guy with almost every famous public cultural figure in the world. Yeah. He definitely put in a lot of kind of magic practices in his stuff. He dabbled with Scientology, and he was an illuminative Thanateros, kind of like Leary and Robert Anton Wilson. I can't say I've read any of Burroughs' books, but as far as an influence on people, very important guy. Him and Brian Geisen.
Now, I know absolutely Brian Geisen, the cut-up method. So, And Burroughs, of course, was a key fixture at, I believe, his Naropa Institute in Boulder, Colorado, for a number of years, along with Allen Ginsberg, Gregory Corso, a number of the beat luminaries. So, and that was founded, of course, for people who don't know, Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche, with the very flamboyant, some would say eccentric, excessive. He was maybe crazy wisdom, I think, was.
Was he a Tibetan monk?
I will include that in the footnotes, the show notes. Absolutely, yeah. And in fact, that was my first, actually. When I was going to university, I was probably a Buddhist, actually, by the time I was. Well, I've probably always been a Buddhist. You just don't realize these things. But I was a Buddhist, like, when I was about 7 or 8 years old. I became a Buddhist one day when I was out in my backyard staring at a pile of ants, thinking about, these are little creatures. They're off, doing their little thing. They're a bit of intelligence, and they're networking, and what makes me different from these little guys? And should I, I could just destroy these ants right now, if I wanted, and should I? And, would that be a good thing? And what would be the implication? So, of course, I did not, but it was for me, it was where I think really that's where I awoken as a child to the whole Buddhist kind of philosophy.
Have you ever heard of the Thubten Gyatso, the 13th Dalai Lama? Are you familiar with him?
Well, you mean the Dalai Lama? The 13th Dalai Lama, not the present 14th. No. Yes.
Well, he was one of Crowley's disciples. Gerald York was one of his kind of he was actually his personal representative to the West. His name was Thubten Gyatso, and he studied. Have you ever heard of the Kala Chakra initiation?
Yeah, of course. Yes.
So, well, I'm not familiar with that kind of Buddhism, but that was something that Gerald York was involved in. So he was one of Crowley's probably longest but sidekicks of Crowley, and he was a promoter of his book. So it's interesting that he kind of bled over, kind of like Bennett, into Eastern mysticism.
So you're saying he was like an emissary, that the 13th?
Yeah, so he was the personal representative to the West of this guy, the 13th Dalai Lama. He was a proponent and promoter of Iyengar's yoga. So Gerald York actually wrote a book by BKS Iyengar and put that into, the West. He was the Light on Yoga was Iyengar's book. So,
that's amazing. I never heard of this, and I really love it when I come across new information like this. Is this something? Did you actually address this and kind of go into a little more detail?
I did. I covered Gerald York. Gerald York was another kind of privileged guy from England. England was very classist back in those days, but he really was taken by Crowley, and he actually would go to Crowley had all these kind of semi-deranged public pronouncements, and York would be standing by his side. But he also, after Crowley died in 1947, York was actually one of his biggest collectors. After Crowley died, what York did is she called everybody who knew Crowley and said, "Do you have anything to donate to create this collection?" So there's something called the York Collection I don't think it's the British Museum. It's one of the main museums in London that has tons of Crowley stuff. And almost all Crowley biographers take the journey to go there to look at the York Collection. And York is this kind of intermediary between a lot of the current Crowley acolytes or disciples. So York served as on Kenneth Anger's Lucifer Rising. York was there as a advisor. So he's there in the background of a lot of these kind of things. And York, the children of York looked just like him. He was a very tall, like the elitist of England back in those days are like 4 inches taller than the commoners. And his kids are still around. There's actually Bruce Dickinson of Iron Maiden. Yeah. He made a movie about Crowley that's called Crowley, and in England it's called The Chemical Wedding. But the director, actually there's a video of the director going to talk to this guy Gerald York's kids. It's super interesting. If you look it up, I have a copy of it. I'll try to get it to you. It's really amazing. Yeah. So this guy York is this kind of like Crowley. Crowley was a person who fused East and West, and York was kind of like that as well. It's kind of like a proponent of Eastern mysticism, but also a member of the OTO and Crowley's disciple too, which is very odd. So people would probably see a side of York that was this kind of Eastern mystical and not know that he was a member of the ODO, the, Oriental Knights.
And a lot of these too, like these secret society members, they do typically, a lot of them come from the upper classes of society, and just as things as things would have it, are heavily very much tied into intelligence agencies, as you we've shown with the reference to Ian Fleming, and of course with Crowley, the secret agent 666. So that's just kind of par for the course, whether it's like the Freemasons or the OTO or Golden Dawn. So, but York in particular, is there any mention of that just off the top of your head, that him playing a part in some kind of espionage or just kind of intrigue, other than the fact that I think, as you pointed out, he was emissary between Crowley and the 13th Dalai Lama?
I mean, my instincts would tell me he was a spook, that he was giving information back to England, and he was moving through their old colonies and stuff. I think just like Crowley actually brought a lot of people in as an intermediary in the intelligence agencies. There was another guy by the name of Tom Dryburgh, who was a huge left-wing labor leader in England, who was really Crowley's kind of, he was really going to inherit the throne of the beast. He was supposed to be Crowley's heir, and he was kind of a disappointment like many of other Crowley's disciples. But this guy was an intelligence agent. He was the head of the Labor Party, and he was actually, just like Crowley, he was investigating the communists and all this stuff and infiltrating people. But Tom Dryburgh I cover in my book. English, people from Britain know Tom Dryburgh very well. He's basically like, he'd be like a head of some kind of Democratic Party, Democratic, like not a Clinton, but, somebody who's an operative. But, so Gerald York, he is, really something else. And he shows up in all these the kind of modern, followers of Crowley, all kind of sought out York.
Mm-hmm. So I want to kind of just once again keep things moving along here. With time is of the essence, we're kind of I don't want to keep you tied over too long here. But Alfred Kinsey, and we want to get back, just quickly touch on Kenneth Anger, and got a couple other things too. But Alfred Kinsey, as a huge fan of Aleister Crowley, how did that all? What was the deal there?
Kinsey was a collector of all. He was supposedly a sexologist. He was actually trained in zoology. But he became a sexologist, and probably the most important reference sexologist of the 20th century. It turns out, if you really analyze his stuff, there's a lot of bunk. There's a lot of baloney and scientism, but he had an interest in Crowley's diaries. Crowley was a huge diarist. He always kept magical diaries, and Crowley was really a master of English prose and wrote tons. It's hard. Nobody, not even his biographers, have collected all of his writings, believe it or not, because he wrote under different names. But anyway, Kinsey met with Kenneth Anger, who really is, probably the longest living follower of Crowley and probably the most prominent, and put all of Crowley's writings and rituals in his movies. But he and Anger and Kinsey went to Crowley's Abbey, I think it was 1952, and there's pictures of them in my book sitting in the Abbey, that Crowley got kicked out of when he got kicked out of Italy, like we talked about earlier, when he was at the Mussolini got kicked him out. But so Kinsey was trying to get these diaries, and he did find them. But Kinsey had the same ideas. Believe it or not, he was kind of like, after all the scientific literature that he produced, he had kind of the fundamental ideas that Crowley did. The same thing, the same results, which is you can be homosexual if you want. Pedophilia is okay. And, Crowley was like that too. Crowley went to Northern Africa because the young boys were a little more available. They called him a catamite. It's an old term. But, so Kinsey was a real nut job. He actually, if you read about how he died, it's almost unspeakable. But, he was really something else.
Not familiar with that. Why don't you, share that with us? How did he die?
He had an infection of his genitals that he had,
Well,
torturing himself, basically.
I'm sorry?
He tortured himself to death.
Yeah, no, I got that impression too. I've looked into Kinsey a little bit, and he seems to have been a pretty sick puppy.
Really sick.
Mildly. So
he used to do films with Anger. So he and Anger There's actually, so what Kinsey would do is he would bring people to his attic and take videos of him, and Anger is actually in one of these films. If there's a really good documentary about Kinsey by a guy by the name of Chris Pinto, and he somehow through his excellent research found a video of Anger, and it's called the Kinsey syndrome. There's a video. Yeah. There's a video of Anger and Kinsey together.
Yeah. No, I think I've seen that. It's been a while, but it's worth revisiting for sure. It's a great, really well put together documentary. And one of the things too that jumped out at me there is that, and I didn't realize this because you know how with the way that he's, I guess it was the word loaded or lionized, the way just such a they put, you know, that's why I said beware the cult of personality, people.
So true.
You know, like just hold your horses, not so fast.
He was built on speaking tours. You know, he was subsidized by the Rockefeller Institute, and the Indiana's government would give him $500,000 a year for something like 4 years. And those are in 1950s money. So he had tons of cash. He had tons of followers. Yeah. He had tons of money to collect stuff. But he was a nut. If you read my book and the stuff in there, you'll just...
Well, he was...
I can't even repeat it. I can't repeat it.
And the Chris Pinto, was it the Kinsey syndrome? That's the name, I think? Yeah. That he basically, it's quite damning the way that things are set up there, and it's the case that's made for him being like a major pedophile. And not only that, but as you say, like these weird movies that are being filmed and whatnot, and just he's helping in the sense of it's almost like he's basically really tied into various like pedophile networks.
He was networked with like a German pedophile who would commit unspeakable acts with kids and then report to Kinsey. And Kinsey would actually do experiments on like 1-year-old babies. He should have been arrested. He should have been arrested and put in like a loony bin.
An enabler, that's, I guess, maybe the word I was looking for. And so, but all for scientific purposes, of course, you know, you can cloak
scientism, you know?
it's science. Oh, sure.
He could do whatever he wanted under the rubric of science, and people just said, well, it's science. But it was absolutely amoral. Yeah. Totally. So but his connection is there. His connection to Crowley is legit.
Sounds like it. And isn't it interesting to note, he was, like you say, he was an animal behavioralist or zoologist of some kind, and here he is now, then from there transitioning to experimenting on people, basically.
Right, so that was the whole thing. It's like the doctor mystique, you know. He could say he was a doctor, but if people actually inquire, well, what are you a doctor of? Oh, well, by the way, I'm a zoologist, but now I'm a sex expert. So he played that little game on people.
Something like almost straight out of Nazi Germany. It's kind of creepy. So
I would say that is very, you know, close to the truth. It's just like weird experiments, weird money, and I mean, it's not.
One quick thing I just going to like to say and get out there regarding Mr. Anger is that he apparently from what he predicted his death a number of years ago. He's like, I'm gonna die next year in the fall, and I'm predicting I'm gonna live. He's still alive. This is like 7, 8 years ago. So not so great with the predictions apparently, but you know, good.
He's 89 or something.
Yeah.
He actually had a showing this year in L.A. Of all of his art, and he's still going out giving speeches. There's a speech of him online at the Hammer Museum here in L.A. talking about Crowley. It's very interesting.
I think to kind of wind things down now, a couple more contemporary celebrity names that people will be quite familiar with. David Bowie and how his connection to Christopher Isherwood, how that all kind of ties in. Stanley Kubrick.
We talked about Isherwood in Germany in the Weimar era, and that whole story of Isherwood. He was a compelling figure for Englishmen, and David Bowie read about him, and that's what inspired him to go from L.A. to Berlin. And it was his Berlin stories, so Isherwood's Berlin stories that inspired him. And Bowie went through a pretty intense black magic Crowley phase. Whether he kept to it or not, it's open for discussion, but his final video and music of Black Star has tons of occult symbol. It's really just an occult journey. It has tons of occult symbolism in them. The monoliths and black stars and black suns and all that. But when he was in LA, he was doing all kinds of strange rituals. He actually said that he summoned Satan in a pool on Doheny Street here in LA, and he had to get a witch to come and get it exorcised. So his album that was called Station to Station, it references the Kabbalah. Each part of the Kabbalah is a station, is like a huge occult type album. And he actually, there's a couple of songs where he references, live your life and do what you will. So Bowie definitely, was at one point a pretty serious Crowley fanatic or interested Crowley person.
Yeah, and so that's pretty much in your face too. I mean, there's no mistaking it. And I think, for the longest time, he had great music.
Yeah, I mean, I like his music. When he passed away, I listened to all of his songs, and I just go, man, this is great.
Yeah.
And one of his songs was Quicksand. He goes, I'm closer to the golden dawn, immersed in Crowley's uniform of imagery. And there's tons of pictures of him online dressed in the Sphinx outfit and all kinds of Egyptian regalia. So,
what's the Stanley Kubrick tie-in there exactly?
Well, Kubrick and Arthur C. Clarke worked on the movie 2001, and they actually wrote a book together, and they really spent time thinking and talking. They said that they had tons of 12-hour conversations about this movie. That's still very mysterious. There's tons of interpretations open to what 2001 actually represents, kind of like some of Kubrick's other stuff. But Arthur C. Clarke, if you read his books, they are full of occult references. He knows the numerology. Mm-hmm. He understands, and I reference that in my book. So, like a lot of other science fiction writers, they put in, parts of the mysteries. And one of the fascinating elements, if not the most fascinating element of 2001, is that the monolith is 11 feet tall. So here's the number of magic, the number of the new aeon of Arthur C. Clarke that's formulated in New York right when the Twin Towers were being built for this huge, massive event that took place on September 11th, 2001, referencing the title of the film, A Space Odyssey. And, the guy's name is Bowman, which references, the astrological signs. There's just tons of stuff that I have about Clarke. And Clarke was, he and Kubrick explored kind of one of those illuminated ideas, which is open sexuality, and Clarke was a stone cold boy hunter. He lived in Sri Lanka, and I've been researching for a while. I found this thing about Clarke and the whole story of his forays to boys clubs in Sri Lanka and stuff like that. And it's pretty evident from tons of stuff that that's what this thing was. They've been totally scrubbed from the internet. I cannot find it. They were published in the Murdoch media. I have it in my book. You cannot find the stories of Clarke and his pedophilia anywhere on the internet. And also like Kubrick did, he did the film, Lolita. So, these two guys, they're both is a meeting of two mega intellects, Clarke was a total genius. Clarke's ideas really were the foundation of the satellite system circumnavigating the globe. And he wrote about that and put it into practice, this geocentric circumnavigation.
Was Arthur C. Clarke not also regarded by many as was he not a good, what's known as a good upstanding Freemason?
I wish I knew.
Yeah, I've heard that. I think I've heard that speculated, but
I believe it. I mean, it would make sense. That's how he probably knows the mysteries. So to me, that would, make perfect sense to me if I found out he was amazing. The thing is that I took a very broad overview of these people, and hopefully people read my book and go, oh, I need to look in deeper to this, because there's only so much you can put into 450 pages if you want to cover the expanse of Crowley's effect.
Or an hour and a half, hour and 45 minutes, as it turns out, perhaps, things are looking at interviews. So, X-Files, just a quick aside, the X-Files, actually, there was a tie-in with the 2001.
Yep. The first show of the X-Files had that thing where he and the guy, Mulder, right? Is it Mulder who was watching the show?
With the kid on the couch. This most recent season, the last season they put out there. So yeah, a little bit of.
So there's the 11 right there. So I mean, it's incredible that he made this monolith 11 feet tall, which is Crowley's main number. You know, Crowley's "Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law" is 11 words, 11 syllables. So 11 was really his main number, and it's actually a number that kind of goes back into Western esotericism, where the magician is a meeting of the macrocosm and the microcosm. And the macrocosm symbolizes by a 6, the hexagram, and the pentagram is a 5.
As above, so below.
Yeah, the whole thing. So,
for those with eyes to see. So
there are things. Clark, and you reach childhood's end. The progression of man in Clark's childhood's end is this demon comes from the sky. The people change. And then they says all this stuff about how to change humanity. They have occult powers. Then they're destroyed and sent up into the motherland, and that's his cosmology. And if you read that, there's tons of occult meaning there. The chief demon's name is Corellin with a K. K is the 11th number of the alphabet. So, Clark knows his stuff. Clark was a genius.
And so, 9, let's not forget, it's a triple 3. That's a triple 3. So it's plus on, and then 11. So there's a lot of power there. Was Stanley Kubrick murdered? What do you think? A lot of people.
No, I think he was old. Maybe he was. It's hard to say. I would say his family would say that was the case. I think he died unexpectedly, but that last work of his was a revelation,
Well, and not only that, but absolutely. Have you heard about how it was edited? Like the version that found its way to the silver screen for the people to view throughout the world was a lot heavily edited and totally unlike the version that Kubrick had put together. Do you know about that? And without him dying, that would not have been the case. Supposedly.
Good point. That's a good point, because I think he only would make movies if he had final editing rights. He actually was a smart guy, and he had total control over his films. So it's an interesting point. I mean, I know that he showed it to the execs at, I think it was Warner Brothers or something, and they freaked out. So, because he probably was talking to people who did that kind of stuff.
A lot of people have talked about, are speculating now with the whole Prince, with how Prince passed away. A lot of very murky circumstances. Did he overdose? Was it this or what was?
It's tough to say. I don't think he was in great health.
Well, no, and why? That's the thing you got to ask yourself. Why was he addicted to painkillers? Was it as simple as that? And he just opiate overdose or something, or just simply because he was quite a maverick within the music industry, and I wouldn't imagine that the industry heads would have looked upon him too kindly. So, but let's see now. Johnny Depp and the West Memphis 3 is one of the last subjects. It's the last, I think, what we're going to hit on here and to kind of wind things down. Let me just say that we could maybe go into that a little bit, but. Right. Before we do, I think we have a special guest that's waiting on the line. Let's see if we have him. Yes, I believe standing by. Just one moment, please. Let's see. Are you there, Captain?
Jeffy. Yeah, this may the captain there. So I just want to talk to William here about the Johnny Depp tie-in. Captain Jack Sparrow, of course, with the Pirates of the Caribbean. Well-known franchise. Is it true, William, what I'm hearing? It doesn't look too good for Johnny if what you say is true, which is really quite a shame because so many people really admire the man as an actor and a humanitarian.
Yeah, I think it's a shame. Absolutely. I mean, I think it's a shame anybody got involved in that whole case. But the facts are the facts, and the record speaks for itself. That's all I can say. I really didn't know that whole book was not something I just kind of just fell into. I just kind of walked into. I really didn't know much about the celebrities. I didn't know much about the players. I really didn't know much about the West Memphis 3. But when I read all the material and everything, the result, isn't good. And as more of I read Depp, the more I understand he's into the occult. And if you look at like Polanski's The Ninth Gate and these kind of films, there's tons of occult references. The Ninth Gate is something else.
The chaos magic is what people have been talking about. Is this? It can't be true, though, is it? Or what are we really talking about here? The chaos magic.
Well, I don't know. I don't know about the chaos magic, but it's in the West Memphis 3. There is a lot of black magic is a concurrent theme. You know, it's a consistent theme in the whole swath of that case, all the way from the beginning to the present. And the kind of main character said that he wanted to be the most powerful magician that ever lived. So, these kind of themes are important.
All right, well, I just wanted to get clear. Now, I'll turn things back over to Jeff. And now, thank you very much for dropping by the Robin Hood today. Hope to see you maybe another time in the future. We can discuss other issues.
Thank you.
He's gone. Well, he's gone. So the captain just popping in there for just a brief question. There's a special question he wanted to kind of get to the bottom of. I think he's on pretty good terms actually with Jack Sparrow. So I think they consider each other friends. So it would be sad and unfortunate if there's some darker sort of if people read your book and if the allegations are indeed true, which they could be. Is there any chance of like a legal suit, like to follow? Is the story of the West Memphis 3 perhaps? I'm not sure if we really broke it down for people. Just assuming that everybody knows what it's all about. Can you quickly just give us a quick overview and just update to where things stand with that? The story. What happened?
Out in 2011 on what's called an Alford plea. An Alford plea it's based upon a Supreme Court case involving somebody who pled guilty but publicly said they were innocent. So they are at law right now guilty. They remain guilty at law, and they are actually guilty of first-degree murder. They all signed documents, and the documents are available online to view. So they've never gone back to court to get exonerated. They haven't presented facts to a court of law that necessitate their exoneration, and they've made tons of public statements that say they're innocent, but substantive actual evidence that merits their exoneration. They put stuff out that involves like double hearsay, which is a complete joke in front of the rules of, considering the rules of evidence in any state forum. So, as of today, they still remain guilty at law, all three.
And the three central characters, their names are
Jesse Misskelley, Jason Baldwin, and Damien Eccles, who was born Michael Hutchison.
Oh, that's a little in excess there to the the story. Yeah. And I think the Damien Eccles is probably highest profile of the three. Of the other two, kind of tried to keep a low profile since.
Very low.
Yeah,
very
interesting.
I think Jesse. The interesting thing about them is they all split up when they got out of jail. They were such chums. Why don't they hang out together? One stayed in Arkansas. The other one went to Oregon, I think, or Washington. And Eccles actually went to Salem, Massachusetts, because he thought being at the home of the witch trials would be more comfortable, but he actually ran into a lot of local animus and moved to New York City.
So the case did really become a real cause celeb, I
Absolutely.
think, as it's referred to, and with not only Mr. Depp, but as you pointed out, who are some of the others? It
was Henry Rollins, Margaret Cho, Winona Ryder, Eddie Vedder, the girl from the Dixie Chicks, who name escapes me, the singer. So they all raised tons of money, and the money, they never was a proper accounting, but it's not a joke. It's somewhere between $10 and $20 million. Mm-hmm. And so that could buy you a lot of legal, wrangling.
I guess you would know that. You are
I'm currently an attorney at the state of California.
Absolutely. The Winona Ryder, that whole tie-in too, bringing us back to Leary. We were kind of just as a quick note. She somehow, I think, wasn't he considered her godfather of some kind?
He is her godfather. There's pictures of him with her. So when he was friends with a writer by the name of Horowitz, who that is Winona Ryder's real name. It's Horowitz. And
I wonder if we're related. There could be some kind of something in the family tree there. I think. Well, who knows? I've never really looked into that.
Same name.
But I've always really enjoyed their work on screen, and even though, like, sometimes getting into a little bit of trouble with her issues with shoplifting and whatnot, it's like, well, people have their issues, and she's working on them, so But
well, another interesting thing is, like, one of Crowley's kind of a modern follower, a guy by the name of Genesis P. Orge, when he fled England under suspicious circumstances, he actually went to her house, her dad's house, Michael Horowitz's house in Northern California, and he was hanging out with Timothy Leary. So, and then this guy, Genesis P. Orge, is hanging out with Damien Eccles, and they're doing a movie together in New York. It's called IRL. So, it's all one small world, big series of connections. And this guy, Genesis P. Orge, I think his real name is Megson, he has hung out with the head of the OTO. He's hung out with William Burroughs. So, he's one of these guys who's kind of a cultural figure.
Were not the Memphis Three, were they not confirmed occultists and members of the OTO?
Yeah, Damien Eccles was confirmed a member of the OTO. He actually donated his book collection to the Arkansas chapter of the OTO. Interesting.
So, well, people have they've got to go out and pick up this book. I know I'm going to, and but before we just hand out all the links and whatnot, this is the last little point I'd like to make here and ask you. Crowley was a genius, was he not? I mean,
I think so. I think he really dedicated his life to being one of the most important figures. He considered himself one of the most 7 top people who lived: Muhammad, Buddha, Christ, Aristotle. So he put himself in the class at the top. And one of the interesting things is that most modern occultists will go back and look at Crowley and use him as a foundation. They might not agree with him all the way, but they reconsider Crowley. And there's always some kind of strange, attention. There's a guy out there right now who is actually knew one of Crowley's followers who's, kind of going out and preaching basically about Crowley. His name is, he goes to like these meetings. His name is Lon Milo Duquette, who met with one of Crowley's followers, Israel Regardie.
That's right. Yeah, these are all big, well-known names within the world of esoterica and so forth. So, so magnetic personality, highly charismatic, a con man, but also in some ways, a lot of people see as an evil genius. There's others that think he was a wonderful, pretty great, just a great guy. I know one of the people.
I think that if the people who think that he's some kind of positive figure, he left most of his followers a wreck. He never worked. He punched one of his women and broke her eye socket. He spent time with it. He branded every one of his Scarlet Women in the chest with the mark of the beast, like a literal brand of like a cow brand. Mm-hmm. So they had that for the rest of their life, his mark of the beast, which was like a phallic symbol. So, to say that he was a person who meant well, if you look at his writings, if you read Prophet of Evil, he thought that human beings were cattle, that they should be sheared, that they should be bred. His ideas were fairly similar to Hitler's. So to say that he was some kind of personal advocate of personal freedom, I don't agree with it. And he followed his own doctrines, and he ended up ruined, a junkie.
Well, his last words here, and this is what I was hoping to just end things on, is that I'm not sure if you're aware of what his last words were not, but what my understanding is, I am perplexed.
Yeah.
But there's also another version of things where what I've read is like his last words were, sometimes I truly despise myself.
Yep, there's both of those versions are correct. I've quoted both of those. So he was like a lot of other followers. They questioned their, what they did was right. When he was in his 40s and 50s, he kind of looked back and said, what did I do? Is this really something that I should have done? So I think,
I think in that sense, maybe a really good teacher for people that want to maybe consider, it's like, do you really want to go there? I've myself, like a lot of people, kind of, I've come around the hard way, school of hard knocks and, black sheep of the family. And, I've taken my knocks and, suffered a few blows, slings and arrows and so forth. So, but, you grow up, you wake up, hopefully, you stop it, cut it out, try to, live a better life and a cleaner life, and you find yourself a lot happier. I mean, that's been my experience, at least. I've been a lot happier since, because I think it's a natural for a lot of people coming into the world, children especially, who are very vulnerable and whatnot, but they want to explore. They want to see like what they can experience and how far they can push the limits. But really, you can only push the limit so far, and you're really crossing the line and running the risk of just kind of
not coming back.
Yeah. So we've, folks, thank you once again, William. We've got all your links here. We've been talking with author of Children of the Beast, Aleister Crowley's Shadow over Humanity, William Ramsey. What your links once again, William?
You can go to my YouTube site is Occult Investigations, and my website is Occult Investigations as well.
All right, very good. We will definitely be sure to include those in the show notes. We're going to give a shout out here to all the peeps on Minds.com, which actually that's the last thing I guess we can quickly touch on. You actually recently joined Minds.com, did you not?
I did, yes, sir.
So hopefully, I guess you maybe haven't had much of a chance to kind of find your way around there, but the platform, the new the social networking platform that has been put together recently. But hopefully you enjoy yourself and manage to make a lot of great friends. I think you will. You find a lot of people that you find yourself compatible with and that are receptive to you.
Now a member of the Pirate Radio Network.
Oh, you are you? Well, we'll have to let the captain know about that. And he can maybe get in touch with you later sometime behind the scenes. So thank you once again, William, for Pirate Radio Podcast, episode number 15. I am your host, Jaffe Ryder. Hope to see you again next week, same time, same place. Don't have the calendar here with me at the moment, right in front of me. But we will definitely provide that information for people if they're interested. And